The iron beast let out a final wheeze of steam as it ground to a halt at the edge of nowhere. Through the grimy window, Clara Mayfield watched the town of Bitter Creek materialize from the dust, a collection of weathered buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support, much like the people who inhabited them. She gathered her traveling case, its leather worn smooth from countless hands that had carried it before hers. The conductor, a man whose face bore the map of 1,000 journeys, barely glanced her way as she descended onto the platform. No porter rushed to assist. No familiar face emerged from the small crowd gathered near the depot. She stood alone, a figure in faded blue serge amid the browns and grays of the frontier. The Wyoming wind hit her like a slap, carrying with it the scent of sage, horse sweat, and something else, the particular loneliness that settled into places where the land stretched wider than hope itself. Clara adjusted her bonnet, a futile gesture against the dust that had already begun to settle in the creases of her dress. She'd sewn this dress herself, back in Ohio, when she still believed in the promises written in careful script across dozens of letters. That her, a woman's voice drifted from the cluster of townspeople. The mail-order bride. Don't look like much, came the reply. Too tall for a woman. Look at them hands. Clara's fingers tightened around her case handle. Yes, her hands were large, calloused from years of working her father's farm after he passed. Her height, nearly 5 feet and 9 inches, had been a source of whispers back home too. But those whispers had been nothing compared to the silence that followed when Thomas Hartley broke their engagement, declaring her too mannish for proper society. She lifted her chin and walked toward the depot office, her boots clicking against the worn planks. Inside, a clerk with pomaded hair looked up from his ledger, his expression shifting from boredom to curiosity. Help you, ma'am. I'm looking for Mr. Samuel Morrison. He was to meet me here. The clerk's eyebrows rose. Sam Morrison. He was here earlier, prowling around like a cat with his tail caught. Haven't seen him for... He pulled out a pocket watch. Near on 2 hours now. Clara's stomach tightened. She'd sold everything the farm, her mother's china, even her father's pocket Bible for this journey. 3,000 miles on promises written in neat penmanship, describing a prosperous cattle ranch and a man seeking a capable woman unafraid of honest work. The door banged open, bringing with it another gust of Wyoming wind and a man who looked like prosperity itself. Samuel Morrison wore a black suit that seemed untouched by trail dust, his boots polished to a shine that belonged more to a Denver hotel than a frontier town. He was smaller than she'd imagined, with pale hands that had never gripped a branding iron. His eyes swept over her once, twice, and his face underwent a transformation she'd seen before, disappointment poorly masked by politeness. Miss Mayfield. Mr. Morrison. She extended her hand, a gesture that seemed to perplex him. He took it briefly, his grip weak as water. You're taller than I expected. I'm the same height I've always been, Mr. Morrison. My letters mentioned it clearly. He flushed. Yes, well, letters don't always... That is to say... He cleared his throat. Perhaps we should speak privately. They stepped outside, away from the curious gazes pressing against the depot windows. Morrison couldn't seem to look at her directly, his eyes sliding past her shoulder to focus on the distant mountains. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Miss Mayfield, when I advertised for a wife, I had certain expectations, which were a woman of gentle bearing, someone who would. He gestured vaguely at her person. You're very handsome, in your way, but you're not suitable for society, for the kind of wife a man in my position requires. Clara felt the words like stones, each one finding its mark. Your position, you wrote that you ran cattle. Mr. Morrison, that you needed a partner who could work alongside you. His laugh was thin as paper. I own cattle. Yeah, but I don't work them myself. I have men for that. I need a wife who can host dinners, charm investors from back east. Someone. His eyes finally met hers. Someone who looks like a lady. I see. The words came out steady, though her chest felt tight as a closed fist. And my journey here, the money I spent. He reached into his vest pocket, producing a small leather pouch. I'll cover your return fare. It's the gentlemanly thing to do. She stared at the pouch, then at his face, weak-chinned, eyes already sliding away again. Keep your money, Mr. Morrison. I didn't come 3,000 miles to turn around at the first sign of a man's cowardice. His face reddened. Now see here. Good day to you. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the depot, spine straight as a rifle barrel. Behind her, she heard him sputter. Then the sharp sound of his boots retreating in the opposite direction. The crowd inside the depot had grown. News traveled fast in small towns, and the story of the too-tall bride rejected at the station would feed gossip for weeks. Clara stood in the middle of them all, her traveling case at her feet, and considered her options. She had $43 sewn into her corset. No return ticket. No family to return to, even if she had one. The faces around her ranged from pitying to amused, and one woman, hair piled high and cheeks rouged beyond propriety, actually laughed. Honey, the woman said, you ought to know men like Morrison want dolls, not women. You're better off. Nevertheless, Clara replied, I need work and lodging. Might you know where I could inquire? The woman's laugh died. Work? What kind of work can you do? I can sew, cook, keep accounts, tend livestock, and I've some experience with doctoring learned from my mother before she passed. My lord, someone whispered. She's applying for employment right here in the depot? The crowd pressed closer, and Clara felt the walls closing in. The air grew thick with perfume and pomade and the peculiar scent of judgment. She reached for her case, ready to push through them all and face whatever waited outside, when a voice cut through the chatter like a blade through butter. Step aside. The crowd parted, revealing a man who looked like he'd been carved from the land itself. Taller than Clara by several inches, with shoulders that spoke of real work and hands marked by rope and weather. His face was all angles, with a nose that had been broken at least once and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore canvas pants and a cotton shirt rolled to the elbows, everything about him speaking of function over form. He looked at Clara, then at the crowd. Show's over. Don't you all have somewhere to be? It wasn't a question. The depot began to empty, people filing out with backward glances and whispered comments. Even the rouge-cheeked woman left, though not before giving Clara a look that might have been sympathy. When they were alone, save for the clerk, who'd retreated behind his counter, the man spoke again. Luke Garrett. I run lumber up on Thunder Ridge. Clara Mayfield. She didn't extend her hand this time. I know who you are. Whole town's been talking about Morrison's mail-order bride for weeks. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes might have been contempt not for her, but for the situation. He's a fool. That's becoming apparent. You have plans now. She straightened her shoulders. I'll find work. Bored. I didn't come this far to give up at the first difficulty. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her height, her hands, the determined set of her jaw. Mrs. Holcomb runs a boarding house on 2nd Street. She's particular about her boarders, but she's fair. Might have work, too. Her last girl ran off with a traveling salesman. I appreciate the information, Mr. Garrett. It's just Garrett. He moved toward the door, then paused. Word of advice. Miss Mayfield, this town's got a long memory and a mean streak. Morrison's got friends. Influence, story they'll tell won't be kind to you. I've lived through unkind stories before. He nodded once, as if she'd passed some sort of test. Mrs. Holcomb's place has a green door. Tell her I sent you. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her case in the fading afternoon light. Through the window, She could see Bitter Creek stretching out before her, ramshackle and raw, and nothing like the promise in those letters. But it was here, and so was she, and that would have to be enough. She picked up her case and walked out into the Wyoming wind, toward whatever came next. The green door stood before Clara like a promise or a threat, she couldn't decide which. The boarding house itself was a narrow 2-story building wedged between a dry goods store and what appeared to be a saloon, though the painted sign had faded beyond reading. She knocked twice, the sound hollow in the late afternoon quiet. The woman who answered could have been anywhere from 40 to 60, with iron-gray hair pulled into a bun so severe it seemed to stretch her features. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, took in Clara from bonnet to boots in one swift assessment. "A Mrs. Holcomb." "I am, and you're the Morrison bride." It wasn't a question. "Saw him slinking past here an hour ago like a whipped dog." "Former bride," Clara corrected. "Mr. Garrett suggested you might have a room available." "Did he now, Mrs.?" Holcomb's expression shifted slightly, though whether toward approval or suspicion, Clara couldn't tell. Luke Garrett doesn't usually involve himself in town affairs. He was kind enough to offer guidance. "Kind, Mrs." Holcomb seemed to taste the word. "That's not a term often applied to that man. Come in, then standing on the doorstep feeds gossip." The interior was clean but worn, with wallpaper that had once shown roses but now displayed only their ghosts. A parlor opened to the right, where 2 women sat with needlework, their hands stilling as Clara passed. The smell of lye soap and boiled cabbage permeated everything. "Mrs." Holcomb led her to a small office behind the stairs. "Sit." Clara sat, placing her traveling case at her feet. The older woman settled behind a desk that had seen better decades, pulling out a ledger. "I run a respectable house. Miss Mayfield? No gentlemen callers after 8 o'clock, no spirits in the rooms. Board is paid weekly in advance, $2. Includes breakfast and supper. You miss a meal, that's your loss. Washing is extra unless you do it yourself." "That's fair. I'm also looking for work." "So Garrett mentioned that too. Did he?" "Mrs." Holcomb's pen scratched across the ledger. "My last girl left me in a bind. Thursday. Took off with a snake oil salesman who promised her California gold. Fool girl will be lucky if she makes it past Denver with her virtue intact." Clara remained silent. She'd learned that sometimes silence drew out more information than questions. "I need someone who can cook, clean, and keep accounts. The work is hard and the pay modest $3 a week plus board. But I won't tolerate laziness, loose morals, or theft. You steal from me, I'll see you in jail before sunset." "I understand." "Do you? Because from what I hear, you expected to be a rancher's wife, not a boarding house maid." Clara met her gaze steadily. "What I expected and what I have are 2 different things. Mrs. Holcomb, I've worked since I was old enough to hold a butter churn. Pride doesn't fill an empty stomach." The scratching pen paused. "How old are you, girl?" 27. Old enough to know better than to trust promises in letters. Then, apparently not. Something that might have been humor flickered in Mrs. Holcomb's eyes. "Can you really cook?" "My father never complained, and he was particular about his meals." "Dead, is he?" 3 years now. The farm went to pay his debts." "And your mother?" "Died when I was 15. Lung fever." "Mrs." Holcomb closed the ledger. "I'll give you a week's trial. You work tomorrow through Saturday. If you suit, we'll discuss permanent arrangements. If not, you'll need to find other lodgings." "I accept." "Your room is upstairs, last door on the left. It's small, but the window faces east. You'll get morning sun. Supper is at 6 sharp. You'll eat in the kitchen with me, not with the boarders." Clara understood. She was neither guest nor family, but something in between a position she'd occupied before. "One more thing. Mrs., Holcomb said as Clara rose. Morrison has been spreading talk already. Says you misrepresented yourself, that you're— She paused, choosing her words. Unsuitable for polite company. Some folks will believe him. And you? I believe my own eyes. And Luke Garrett wouldn't send me someone worthless. That man has his faults, but poor judgment isn't among them. She stood, smoothing her apron. Take your things up. Supper's in an hour. We're having hash. Hope you're not too delicate for simple fare. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. But the window did face east, and when Clara pushed aside the faded curtain, she could see beyond the town to where the mountains caught the last of the day's light. She unpacked slowly, hanging her 2 spare dresses on hooks behind the door, placing her few belongings with care. From somewhere below came the sound of voices, the clink of dishes, life moving forward without consideration for her upheaval. She sat on the bed, testing its firmness, and allowed herself exactly 1 minute to feel the full weight of her situation. Then she rose, poured water from the pitcher into the basin, and washed the travel dust from her face and hands. Supper was announced by the sharp ring of a bell. Clara found her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Holcomb stood over a massive stove, wielding a ladle like a weapon. The kitchen was hot and cramped but scrupulously clean, copper pots gleaming on their hooks. You'll learn this stove's moods quick enough, Mrs. Holcomb said without turning. She runs hot in the morning, temperamental by noon, the bread oven's particular about drafts. They ate in silence, the hash simple but filling. Through the wall, Clara could hear the boarders in the dining room, male voices predominantly, discussing lumber prices and the weather. When the meal ended, Mrs. Holcomb handed her an apron. Might as well start now. Dishes need washing. Clara rolled up her sleeves and plunged into the work. The water was scalding, the lye soap harsh, but the familiar rhythm of washing and drying settled something in her chest. This, at least, she knew how to do. She was halfway through the stack when the kitchen door swung open. A man filled the doorway, not tall but broad, with the soft look of someone who enjoyed his meals too well. His clothes marked him as prosperous: a brocade vest, gold watch chain, boots that had never seen real mud. Hey, Mrs. Holcomb, He stopped, seeing Clara. His eyes narrowed. You're her, Morrison's reject. Clara continued washing, not trusting herself to speak. Mr. Pritchard, Mrs. Holcomb's voice could have frosted windows. The dining room is through there. The kitchen is off limits to boarders. I pay good money for my room. Mrs. Holcomb, I have a right to know what kind of element you're bringing in. He stepped closer to Clara, close enough that she could smell the pomade in his hair. Morrison says you tried to trick him, said you sent a false likeness, claimed to be something you're not. Mr. Morrison is entitled to his opinions, Clara said, keeping her voice level. Opinions. The man's out $20 for train fare and considerable embarrassment. You've made him a laughingstock. Then perhaps he should have been clearer about wanting a decoration rather than a wife. Pritchard's face reddened. You've got a tongue on you. No wonder no man back east would have you. The plate in Clara's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. If you'll excuse me, Mr. Pritchard, I have work to do. Work, he snorted. From mail-order bride to kitchen maid in one afternoon. Quite a fall. That's enough, Mrs. Holcomb stepped between them, barely reaching Pritchard's shoulder but somehow taking up more space. Out of my kitchen. Now. I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. Out. He left, but not before shooting Clara a look that promised this wasn't over. When the door swung shut, Mrs. Holcomb returned to her seat, picking up her knitting. Walter Pritchard owns the bank, she said conversationally. Also owns a third of the town council and most of their opinions. Morrison owes him money. Clara resumed washing. I see. You'll have more of that. Pritchard's just the start. Morrison's been playing the wronged party all afternoon, poor man deceived by a scheming woman. By tomorrow, half the town will believe you're some kind of adventuress. And the other half? Will believe worse. Mrs. Holcomb's needles clicked steadily. This town loves a scandal, especially one involving a woman who doesn't know her place. You could leave. Take the return fare Morrison offered. I burned that bridge rather thoroughly. Good. Bridges built on lies aren't worth crossing anyway. She paused in her knitting. But staying won't be easy. You'll need a thicker skin than what you're wearing now. Clara dried the last plate, hanging the towel on its hook. Her hands were red from the hot water. Her back ached. And tomorrow promised more of the same. But she was still standing, still breathing, still herself despite Morrison's attempts to make her small. I've survived worse than small-town gossip, she said. Mrs. Holcomb studied her over her spectacles. Maybe you have. We'll see. The kitchen door opened again, but this time it was a young woman who peered in one of the needleworkers from the parlor. Mrs. Holcomb, mister. Garrett's at the front door. Says he needs a word. Clara's hand stilled on the dish rag. Mrs. Holcomb rose with a grunt. What's that man want at this hour, Miss Mayfield? You'd better come too, if he's here about you. Might as well hear it firsthand. They found Luke Garrett on the front porch, hat in hand. The twilight cast long shadows across his face, making it difficult to read his expression. Mrs. Holcomb, Miss Mayfield. He nodded to each. I apologize for the hour, but I thought you should know Morrison's been drinking at the Silver Dollar, running his mouth about taking legal action. Legal action? Clara couldn't hide her disbelief. For what? Fraud. Says you contracted to marry him under false pretenses. He's got Pritchard's ear, and Pritchard's got Judge Thornton's. Mrs. Holcomb snorted. Thornton couldn't judge a pie contest fairly. What's Morrison's real game? My guess salving his pride, making sure Miss Mayfield serves as an example to any other woman who might forget her place. Garrett's eyes found Clara's. It's all wind right now, but wind can turn into a storm quick enough out here. What do you suggest I do? Clara asked. Nothing, for now. Let him blow himself out. But keep your wits about you, and don't give him any ammunition. He set his hat back on his head. I'll be in town regular, hauling lumber, if you need anything. We'll manage. Mrs. Holcomb interrupted. We've dealt with blustering men before. Garrett looked like he might say more, then simply nodded. Evening, then. As his footsteps faded into the darkness, Mrs. Holcomb turned to Clara. That's twice in one day Luke Garrett's involved himself with your affairs. Man hasn't shown that much interest in anything besides timber contracts in 5 years. He's being neighborly. That man wouldn't know neighborly if it bit him. No, there's something else. She shook her head. Problem for another day. You've got an early morning tomorrow, and bread won't bake itself. Clara climbed the narrow stairs to her room, each step a reminder of how far she'd fallen in just one day. From anticipated bride to boarding house maid. From hopes of partnership to washing dishes for women who looked at her with pity or scorn. But as she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking not of Morrison's threats or Pritchard's contempt, but of Luke Garrett's weather-worn hands and winter sky eyes. Twice he'd appeared when she needed help, asking nothing in return. In her experience, men who asked for nothing usually wanted everything. She'd have to be careful there, too. The room was cold, and she pulled the thin quilt up to her chin. Through the window, stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over her journey west, indifferent to her dreams or their destruction. Tomorrow would bring more dishes, more whispers, more reminders of what she'd lost. But she was still here, still herself, and that, as Mrs. Holcomb said, would have to be enough. The week passed in a blur of hot water, harsh soap, and careful silences. Clara learned the boarding house rhythms quickly: breakfast at 6, dishes, laundry on Mondays, mending on Tuesdays. The delicate dance of avoiding Walter Pritchard's increasingly bold attempts to corner her in the hallway. By Saturday, her hands were raw, but she'd earned Mrs. Holcomb's grudging approval. "You'll do," the older woman announced, counting out $3 silver. "Same arrangement next week, if you're willing." Clara pocketed the coins, their weight both comforting and meager. "I'm willing." It was after the lunch dishes that Luke Garrett appeared again, this time at the kitchen door. He held his hat in one hand, a worn leather satchel in the other. "Mrs. Holcomb, Miss Mayfield." His eyes lingered on Clara's reddened hands before rising to her face. "I have a proposition." Mrs. Holcomb's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Do you now?" "Business proposition," he clarified. "I need someone who can read and figure. My bookkeeper lit out for California last month, and the accounts are in a tangle. I heard Miss Mayfield has schooling." "Where did you hear that?" Clara asked. "Your letters to Morrison. He was showing them around the saloon, reading the parts about your education. Seemed to think it proved you were putting on airs." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. Those letters had been private, full of hopes she now saw as foolish. "I see. Can you keep books?" "I kept them for my father's farm. I know my numbers." Garrett nodded. "The pay's $1 a week, plus meals when you're at the camp. It's rough up there, dozen men, no other women, but they know to mind their manners or find work elsewhere." Mrs. Holcomb set down her darning. "You're asking her to travel to a logging camp weekly, alone. Have you lost what little sense God gave you?" She'd go up with a supply wagon Mondays, come back Thursdays with a lumber haul, 3 days a week at most. She could keep her position here the other days. "Why?" Clara asked directly. "Why offer this to me?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Because Morrison and his friends are working to make sure you can't find decent employment anywhere in town. Because you need better wages than what washing dishes pays. And because I need someone who can add numbers without using their fingers." "That's not an answer." His eyes met hers, winter sky holding steady. "Maybe I don't like seeing someone run out of options. Maybe I remember what that feels like." The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the mantel clock. Mrs. Holcomb looked between them, her expression unreadable. "If she goes," the older woman said finally, "she goes as my employee, not yours. The boarding house has business with the camp buying lumber for repairs. She'll be doing my bookkeeping there. Understand?" "If that's how you want to play it." "It is. And Luke Garrett. If any harm comes to her." "It won't." Clara found her voice. "Don't I get a say in this?" Both turned to look at her, as if they'd forgotten she was more than a problem to be solved. "When would I start?" she asked. "Monday, if you're willing. Supply wagon leaves at dawn." She thought of Pritchard's leering face, of the whispers that followed her through town, of $3 a week when she needed so much more. Then she thought of a logging camp full of rough men and her own vulnerability. "I'll need to think about it." Garrett nodded. "Fair enough. Let me know by Sunday evening." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Mayfield, my men are rough but not cruel. Can't say the same for town society." After he left, Mrs. Holcomb returned to her darning with unusual vigor. "That man's playing with fire, and he knows it." "What do you mean?" "Luke Garrett hasn't had a woman at that camp since his wife died. 5 years now." Clara's hand stilled on the dish towel. "He was married." Sarah Garrett. Consumption took her. Winter of '68. He went half mad with grief, threw himself into work, built that lumber operation from nothing, like he could cut down enough trees to fill the hole she left. Mrs. Holcomb's needle paused. He's offering you more than bookkeeping, whether he knows it or not. I'm not looking for Didn't say you were, but this town talks, and a woman going to a camp full of men, even for legitimate work. She shook her head. Morrison's already painted you as loose. This won't help. Clara hung the towel carefully on its hook. Morrison's painted me as many things. At least this pays better than his opinions. She spent Sunday in careful deliberation. After church, where she sat in the back pew and ignored the turned heads and whispered comments, she walked to the edge of town. The mountains rose before her, dark with pine and possibility. Somewhere up there was Garrett's camp, a place where she could earn real wages, where the trees might muffle the sound of gossip. But Mrs. Holcomb was right. A woman alone among men invited speculation, and she had little reputation left to spare. Still, $4 a week instead of $3. It would take years to save enough at $3, even if she spent nothing. As evening approached, she found herself at the boarding house's front door, bonnet in place, decision made. The walk to Garrett's lodgings, a small house near the lumberyard, took only minutes, but long enough for her to gather her courage. He answered on the second knock, shirt sleeves rolled up, suspenders hanging loose. Behind him, she glimpsed a sparse room, everything functional and clean but holding no warmth. Miss Mayfield, I'll take the position, with conditions. He leaned against the doorframe, waiting. I sleep in a separate building, with a lock. I report only to you, not to any foreman who thinks he can order me about. And if any man behaves inappropriately, he's gone. Agreed. Just like that? Miss Mayfield, I need those books sorted more than I need to argue terms. The camp office has quarters attached, used to be where I stayed before I built a cabin. Lock's solid, and I'll put a bar on the inside if it makes you feel safer. It would. Then it's done. Wagon leaves from the lumberyard at dawn. Pack warm, it's colder up the mountain, and weather's turning. Clara turned to leave, then looked back. Why did Morrison show my letters around? What purpose did that serve? Garrett's expression darkened. Same purpose a man has when he kicks a dog that bit him, making himself feel bigger by making you smaller. It's working. Half this town thinks I'm a schemer. The other half thinks I'm pathetic. This town's opinion isn't worth the breath it takes to speak it. He straightened. I'll see you tomorrow. Miss Mayfield, don't be late. Dutch doesn't wait for anyone. The walk back to the boarding house seemed longer, each step carrying her further from the safe. Known world of women's work into something uncertain, but uncertainty, she was learning, might be better than the slow suffocation of resignation. That night, she packed carefully. Her warmest dress, extra stockings, the accounting ledgers she'd saved from her father's things. Mrs. Holcomb contributed a thick shawl and advice. Keep your wits sharp and your tongue sharper. Men respect what they can't easily handle. She paused. And Clara, that camp's been Garrett's refuge for 5 years? You're the first person he's let into it. Mind how you tread. Clara lay awake long into the night, listening to the wind rattle the window. Tomorrow would begin something new, not the life she'd planned, but perhaps one she could build herself. Ledger by ledger, dollar by dollar. Dawn came gray and reluctant, bringing with it a mist that turned the world to shadows. Clara arrived at the lumberyard to find a wagon already loaded with supplies. 2 mules standing patient in their traces. The driver, a grizzled man with a magnificent mustache, looked her up and down. You, the bookkeeper? I am. Dutch Vanderberg. He didn't offer to help her up. Hope you're not expecting conversation. I don't talk mornings. Clara climbed onto the bench, settling her small bag at her feet. The lumberyard was beginning to wake men arriving for work. The screech of saws starting up. She saw curious faces, heard the beginning of whispers. But then Dutch clicked to the mules, and they were moving. The road out of town was rutted and rough, climbing steadily into the foothills. True to his word, Dutch didn't speak. leaving Clara to her thoughts and the growing wilderness around them. Pine trees closed in on either side, their scent sharp in the morning air. The mist clung to everything, making the world seem smaller and larger at once. They stopped once to rest the mules, and Dutch finally broke his silence. "Garrett says you're to have the office quarters. That's good, keeps you clear of the bunkhouse. Men get peculiar when they're too long from civilization." "I can manage." He studied her from under bushy eyebrows. "Maybe you can." "Garrett seems to think so, and he's not often wrong about people." He pulled out a pipe, packing it slowly. "Wasn't always a logger, you know. Had schooling back east, same as you." "What happened?" "Life. Same thing that happens to everyone who ends up this far from where they started." He lit the pipe, drew deep. "Mountains don't care what you were before, only what you are now." They reached the camp by mid-morning. It sprawled across a cleared valley log building scattered like dice, the sound of axes and saws creating a constant rhythm. Men stopped work to stare as the wagon rolled through, and Clara kept her eyes forward, chin high. The office was a small building set apart from the others, with quarters attached as Garrett had promised. He emerged as they pulled up, his presence seeming to create a bubble of order in the chaos. "Dutch, Miss Mayfield." He helped her down, his hand firm but impersonal. "I'll show you the office." Inside was a disaster. Papers covered every surface. Ledgers lay open and abandoned. Receipts sprouted from boxes like white flowers. Clara stood in the doorway, momentarily overwhelmed. "The bookkeeper really did leave in a hurry," she said. "Left in a bottle is more like it. Started drinking more than figuring. So I cut him loose." Garrett moved aside a stack of invoices. "Can you make sense of this?" Clara walked to the desk, running her fingers along the ledgers. "It'll take time, but yes, though I'll need to establish a system." "Whatever you need." He moved to a door at the back. "Your quarters are through here." The room was small but clean, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair. The promised lock was solid, and true to his word. A wooden bar leaned against the wall. "Meals are at the cookhouse, breakfast at 5. Lunch at noon, supper at 6. Cookies particular about timing." He paused at the door. "Any questions?" "Several, but they can wait until I've seen the books properly." He nodded. "I'll leave you to it. If anyone bothers you, you tell me directly." After he left, Clara stood alone in the chaos of papers and possibility. Through the window, she could see men moving between buildings, the mountains rising beyond like walls. She'd traded one form of judgment for another, but at least here she could prove her worth in numbers that added up correctly, in books that balanced. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By evening, she'd established enough order to see the scope of the problem. The previous bookkeeper had been creative with mathematics, and not in ways that favored accuracy. She was deep in a tangle of supply costs when a bell rang, startling her from concentration. The cookhouse was thick with steam and the smell of stew. Conversations died as she entered, 20 pairs of eyes following her progress to where Garrett sat. He gestured to an empty place across from him. "Gentlemen," he said, voice carrying easily through the silence. "This is Miss Mayfield. She'll be handling the books 3 days a week. You'll treat her with the same respect you'd show your mothers, or you'll find work elsewhere. Clear." A chorus of muttered agreement rose from the tables. Clara sat, accepting a bowl from a massive man in a stained apron who had to be cookie. The stew was thick and heavily salted, the bread fresh. She ate steadily, aware of the covert glances and whispered speculation. "How bad is it?" Garrett asked quietly. "Your former bookkeeper was either a fool or a thief, possibly both." "Can you fix it?" "Given time, yes, but I'll need access to bank records, supplier contracts, wage lists, everything." "You'll have it." A younger man at the next table leaned forward. "Pardon, miss, But are you the lady who came to marry Sam Morrison? The cookhouse went quiet again. Clara set down her spoon carefully. I came to marry the man Morrison claimed to be in his letters. That man turned out not to exist. Someone snorted. Sounds like Morrison. All right. Man wouldn't know truth if it bit him. Enough, Garrett said. Miss Mayfield's business is her own. The meal continued with less tension, conversations resuming around them. Clara caught Fragment's problems with equipment, a stand of trees that would be tricky to fell, someone's rheumatism acting up, normal talk of men at work, oddly comforting in its mundane concerns. As she rose to leave, several men touched their hats, small gestures, but she recognized them as acceptance, provisional though it might be. Back in the office, she lit the oil lamp and returned to the ledgers. Through the thin walls, she could hear the camp settling for the night boots on wooden floors, the distant sound of a harmonica, someone's hacking cough, different from the boarding house's careful quiet. But there was something honest about the noise. She worked until her eyes burned, finally understanding why Garrett had been willing to risk town gossip to get his books in order. The previous bookkeeper had made a thorough mess, possibly skimming funds in the confusion. It would take weeks to untangle, but she'd always liked puzzles. As she prepared for bed, barring the door as promised, she thought about Dutch's words. The mountains didn't care what you were before. Perhaps that was what she needed, a place that judged her only on what she could do now, not what she'd failed to become. The harmonica played on, a lonely sound that spoke of distance and longing. But there was beauty in it too. The way there was beauty in the ledgers finally beginning to balance, in earning wages that were truly hers. She'd come west to be a wife, but perhaps she'd found something else instead, a chance to be herself, undefined by anyone's expectations but her own. The lumber camp routine became Clara's salvation. 3 days in the mountains wrestling with accounts, 4 days in town enduring whispers and washing dishes. It was a peculiar rhythm, but it worked. By her 3rd week, the men had stopped staring when she entered the cookhouse. By the 4th, some even nodded greeting. The books told their own story. Once she'd untangled the previous bookkeeper's deceptions, she discovered the operation was more profitable than anyone realized. She presented her findings to Garrett one Thursday evening, spreading papers across his desk in the camp office. Your former bookkeeper was skimming, but not as much as I first thought. Mostly, he was incompetent. She pointed to a column of figures. You've been overpaying for supplies by nearly 20%. Henderson at the mill has been padding invoices. Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying the numbers. You're certain? I compared 3 months of receipts. The pattern is clear. She pulled out another sheet. Also, you have 2 men on payroll who haven't worked here in months. Their wages have been going somewhere, but not to them. His jaw tightened. Names. Jackson and Flores, according to Cookie. Jackson broke his leg and went back east in July. Flores took work at the Morrison Ranch in August. Morrison. The name came out flat. Of course. Clara kept her voice neutral. I can't prove he's receiving the wages, only that someone is... Don't need proof. Pattern's enough. He gathered the papers. You've done good work, Miss Mayfield. This'll help considerably. There's more. She hesitated, then pushed forward. Your contracts with the railroad are underpriced. You could negotiate better terms, especially for the specialty lumber. Could I? Something in his tone suggested amusement. You're the only outfit that can deliver the quantities they need on schedule. That's worth a premium. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the valley. My wife used to say I was too soft in business, said I'd rather be liked than paid fairly. It was the first time he'd mentioned her directly. Clara waited, sensing the weight of the moment. Sarah had a head for figures too. He continued. Kept the books when we were starting out, back when this was just 2 men and a cross-cut saw. He turned back. You remind me of her. Not in looks she was small, dark-haired, but in the way you see straight through to what matters. I'm not trying to. I know. He returned to the desk. How much should I ask for the railroad contracts? They spent the next hour revising numbers, planning strategy. It was the longest conversation they'd had, and Clara found herself relaxing into the work. Garrett was sharp, quick to grasp implications, willing to listen. When they finally finished, full dark had settled over the camp. "I'll drive you back to town," he said. "Too late for you to go alone." The ride down the mountain was quiet, the wagon wheels crunching through early October frost. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, aware of Garrett's solid presence beside her. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. They'd said what needed saying in numbers and contracts. As they neared town, he spoke. "There's a harvest dance next week. Whole town turns out, even those who don't usually mix." "I heard," Mrs. Holcomb had mentioned it, along with her opinion that Clara should stay away. "And you planning to go?" "I hadn't thought to. Dancing requires a partner, and I'm rather short on those." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Might not be, if you wanted to go." Clara's breath caught. "Mr. Garrett." "Luke. And I'm not proposing anything improper. Just thinking it might do the town good to see that some of us don't agree with Morrison's version of events. And it wouldn't hurt your reputation to be seen with the notorious Miss Mayfield." "My reputation can handle it. Question is whether yours can handle being seen with a rough lumberman." She considered this. "I suppose we'll find out." He dropped her at the boarding house without further comment. But Clara saw the slight smile before he turned away. She found Mrs. Holcomb waiting in the kitchen, knitting needles clicking like telegraph keys. "Luke Garrett brought you home." The work ran late. Click, click. He mentioned the dance. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "How did you—" "Man hasn't attended a social function in 5 years. Suddenly he's asking about harvest dances at the Mercantile. Doesn't take a genius." She set down her knitting. "You going?" "I don't know. Should I?" "Depends what you want. If it's to fade into the background until this town forgets you exist, then no. If it's to plant your flag and say you're staying regardless of what anyone thinks, then yes." Clara sat heavily in the kitchen chair. "I need to alter my good dress. It's been mended so many times I'm not sure it'll hold together for dancing. I might have some fabric put aside. Nothing fancy, but good wool that'll wear well." Mrs. Holcomb resumed her knitting. "You helped me save near $10 with that new supplier you found. Seems fair, I help you look presentable." The week passed in a blur of preparation. Word spread that Luke Garrett would attend the dance, and with whom. The boarding house dining room buzzed with speculation. Pritchard made increasingly snide comments about social climbers and women who don't know their place. Clara ignored him, focusing on the dress taking shape under Mrs. Holcomb's surprisingly skilled hands, deep blue wool, simple lines that suited her height, with touches of cream lace at the collar and cuffs. When she tried it on the night of the dance, she hardly recognized herself. "You'll do," Mrs. Holcomb pronounced. "Now remember, spine straight, chin up. You've nothing to apologize for." Luke arrived precisely at 7, wearing a black suit she'd never seen before. He'd trimmed his beard, and his boots shone with polish. He stood in the boarding house parlor like he was ready to face down a grizzly, holding a small box. "Miss Mayfield." He offered the box. "Thought you might, that is. Sarah had these, never felt right selling them." Inside lay a pair of pearl hair combs, delicate and lovely. Clara's throat tightened. "I couldn't—" "Please, they shouldn't sit in a drawer forever. She'd have liked knowing they were worn again." Clara let Mrs. Holcomb help secure the combs, their weight strange but steadying. When she descended the stairs, Luke offered his arm formally, as if they were in a Boston drawing room rather than a frontier boarding house. The harvest hall, really just the largest barn in town, cleaned and decorated for the occasion, glowed with lantern light. They could hear the fiddle music from outside, the sound of laughter and stomping feet. Clara's steps slowed. "Second thoughts?" Luke asked. "Third and fourth thoughts. But I've come this far." "That you have." They entered together, and the room stuttered to near silence. Clara felt the weight of every stare, heard the whispers ripple outward like waves. Morrison stood near the punch bowl, his face flushing red. Pritchard looked apoplectic. Luke guided her through the crowd, nodding to those who greeted him, ignoring those who didn't. They found space near the musicians, and when the next song began, a reel she remembered from childhood, he led her onto the floor. "I should warn you," he said as they took position. "I haven't danced in 5 years. I haven't danced in longer. We'll muddle through." They did more than muddle. Luke moved with the same steady confidence he brought to everything, and Clara found herself remembering steps she thought she'd forgotten. Other couples joined them, the floor filling until their presence became just part of the pattern. During a break between sets, they stood by the refreshment table. Several of Luke's workers approached, touching their hats to Clara, asking after the books or thanking her for catching errors in their pay. Their wives, following behind, eyed her with curiosity rather than hostility. "You've been fixing the payroll mistakes?" one woman asked. "Tom came home with an extra $8 last week. Said the new bookkeeper found where he'd been shorted." "Just doing my job," Clara replied. "Well, it's appreciated. Tom works hard for his wages." It was a small crack in the wall of town opinion, but Clara felt it like sunlight. The evening progressed better than she'd dared hope. She danced with Dutch, who proved surprisingly graceful, and with Cookie, who was not Mrs. Holcomb arrived late, surveyed the room like a general reviewing troops, and pronounced the event adequate. It was during a waltz, as Luke guided her through the gentle turns, that Morrison finally approached. He'd clearly been drinking, his steps unsteady, collar askew. "May I cut in?" The words slurred slightly. Luke's hand tightened on Clara's waist. "No." "Come now, Garrett, share the wealth. Miss Mayfield came all this way to dance with me. After all." "The ladies' dance card is full," Luke said evenly. Morrison's face darkened. "The lady that's rich. You know what she is, a fraud. A spinster who thought she could trick—" "That's enough." Luke's voice could have frozen water. "Walk away, Morrison. Or what you'll defend her honor. What honor does a woman like that have?" Clara stepped forward before Luke could respond. "Mr. Morrison, you're drunk and making a fool of yourself. More of one than usual, which is saying something." The music had stopped. Everyone watched. Morrison swayed. "You cost me $20. "No, sir. Your own cowardice cost you far more than that. You wanted a decoration, not a wife, when I turned out to be a person instead of a pretty picture. You ran like a scared rabbit." She kept her voice clear. "Carrying. I'm grateful. Actually, better to learn a man's character at the train station than after the wedding." Someone in the crowd snickered. Morrison's face went from red to purple. You are done wasting time on you." Clara turned back to Luke. "I believe this is still our dance." The musicians, bless them, struck up immediately. Luke swept her back into motion, leaving Morrison standing alone in the center of the floor. After a moment, Pritchard collected him, steering him toward the door. "That was well done," Luke murmured, "though you may have made an enemy." "I already had one. Now it's official." They danced until Clara's feet ached, until the lanterns burned low and couples began drifting home. As Luke walked her back to the boarding house, the streets quiet except for their footsteps, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months: contentment. "Thank you," she said as they reached the green door. "For tonight, for the work, for not believing Morrison's version of me." Nothing to thank me for. He hesitated, then reached out to touch one of the pearl combs. These suit you. Sarah would be pleased. I'll take good care of them. I know. He stepped back, touching his hat. I'll see you Monday. Miss Mayfield. Clara, she said. I think we've moved past formalities. Clara, then good night. She watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Inside, Mrs. Holcomb was waiting with hot tea and questions, but Clara pleaded exhaustion and climbed to her room. She removed the combs carefully, placing them in their box like treasures. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the Wyoming sky. Somewhere, Morrison was nursing his pride and plotting revenge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight, she had danced. Tonight, she had stood in a room full of people who'd been prepared to scorn her and made them see her differently. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to start. She thought of Luke's steady hand at her waist, the way he'd said her name like it mattered. Dangerous thinking, that she'd come west for one man's promises and found them hollow. She couldn't afford to build hopes on another's kindness. Yet, as she prepared for bed, she found herself humming the last waltz. Her feet remembering the steps, her heart remembering the feeling of being, for once, exactly where she belonged. The Monday after the dance brought a cold rain that turned the mountain road to mud. Dutch grumbled the entire way up, fighting to keep the wagon from sliding into the ditches. Clara huddled under an oilcloth, water dripping from her bonnet brim, wondering if this was nature's way of returning her to reality after Saturday night's brief magic. At the camp, she found chaos. The office door stood open, papers scattered across the muddy floor. Luke appeared before she could even climb down from the wagon, his face grim. We had a visitor last night, he said, helping her navigate the mud. Someone broke in, went through everything. Clara surveyed the damage, her heart sinking. Weeks of careful organizing destroyed. The ledgers, safe. I started keeping them in my cabin after you found the skimming. He bent to retrieve a soaked invoice. This was meant to send a message. A Morrison? Or Pritchard, or both. He straightened. I can get some of the boys to help clean up. No. Clara removed her wet bonnet, already rolling up her sleeves. This is my work. I'll handle it. They spent the morning salvaging what they could. Many documents were ruined, ink running like tears down the pages. But Clara had learned caution early. She'd made copies of the most important papers, storing them separately. As she laid these out to dry, Luke watched with something like admiration. You expected trouble. I've learned to prepare for it. She arranged receipts on every available surface. My father always said hope for sun, but keep an umbrella handy. Smart man. He was. Until the fever took him and I learned just how many debts Hope couldn't pay. Luke built up the fire, the warmth slowly filling the small office. They worked in companionable silence. And by noon, some order had been restored. Cookie brought lunch-thick stew and cornbread, and they ate at the cleared desk. This won't be the end of it, Luke said finally. Morrison's got his pride stung, and Pritchard sees you as a threat to the natural order. What natural order would that be? The one where men like him make the rules and women follow them. Clara set down her spoon. Then I suppose I'll continue to be a threat. That's what I figured you'd say. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Which is why I'm offering you this permanent position, not just 3 days a week. Full bookkeeper, with a cabin instead of just the office quarters. The pay would be $6 a week. Clara stared at the envelope. That's very generous. It's practical. You've saved me more than that already with what you've found. And having you here full-time means less chance for midnight visitors to undo your work. The town will talk more than they already do. Let them. My business is lumber, not gossip. She thought about the boarding house, about Mrs. Holcomb's gruff kindness, about dishes and whispers and Pritchard's leering face. Then she thought about ledgers that balanced, about men who touched their hats respectfully, about work that mattered. "Can I have a day to consider?" "Take the time you need." That evening, as Dutch drove her back to town, she turned the offer over in her mind. $6 a week was more than many men earned. With careful saving, she could build something maybe not the life she'd imagined, but a life nonetheless. Mrs. Holcomb took the news better than expected. "Can't say I'm surprised. Luke Garrett knows value when he sees it." "You're not angry I'm leaving you short-handed." "Girl, I've been short-handed since the day I opened this place. I'll manage." She studied Clara over her spectacles. "You sure about this living up there? Only woman among all those men." "They've been respectful so far." "With Luke around? Sure, but he's not always there. Sometimes he's gone for days, negotiating contracts or checking timber stands." Clara hadn't considered that. "I'll be careful." "Careful's good. Smart's better." Mrs. Holcomb opened a drawer, pulling out something wrapped in cloth. "This was my husband's. Know how to use it." The derringer was small but well maintained. Clara's father had taught her to shoot rabbits, mostly, when they threatened the garden, but this was different. "I can learn." "See that you do? And Clara, don't let that mountain swallow you whole. Come to town sometimes. A woman needs other women, even if she doesn't think so." Clara moved to the camp that Thursday, her possessions fitting easily in the wagon. The cabin Luke had mentioned turned out to be sturdy and clean, with an iron stove, a bed with a thick quilt, and luxury of luxuries, a shelf for books. Someone had stocked firewood and left a basket of provisions on the table. "Cookie's doing," Luke explained when he showed her around. He said no bookkeeper of his was going hungry on the first night. That evening, after the supper bell, Clara found herself truly alone for the first time since arriving in Wyoming. The cabin felt too quiet after weeks of boarding house noise. She unpacked slowly, placing her father's ledgers on the shelf, hanging her dresses on pegs, setting the derringer in the drawer beside the bed. A knock interrupted her organizing. She opened the door to find 3 of the younger workers boys, really, barely older than children holding parcels. "Evening, Miss Clara," the tallest said, Adam's apple bobbing nervously. That is, the boys took up a collection. Figured you might need things, being new and all." The parcels contained practical gifts, lamp oil, candles, a warm scarf, writing paper. At the bottom of one box, wrapped in brown paper, was a small mirror. "So you can see to fix your hair proper," the nervous boy explained, blushing furiously. "My ma always said a lady needs a good mirror." Clara's eyes burned. "Thank you, all of you. This is very kind." They shuffled away, embarrassed by her emotion. Clara closed the door and leaned against it, overwhelmed. She'd come west expecting partnership and found rejection. But here, in this rough camp, she was finding something else: acceptance, earned one balanced ledger at a time. The next morning brought new challenges. Henderson from the mill arrived, furious about the invoice discrepancies she'd uncovered. He blustered into the office where Clara was working, face red with indignation. "Where's Garrett? I don't discuss business with clerks." "Mr. Garrett is reviewing timber stands. I handle all accounting matters." Clara didn't look up from her ledger. "Would you like to discuss the overcharges, or shall I simply deduct them from future payments?" "Overcharges, how dare you?" Invoice dated September 15th. She pulled out the paper. "Charged for 2,000 board feet of premium pine. Delivered 1,800. Standard grade." Invoice dated September 22nd. Those were honest mistakes. 14 honest mistakes in 3 months. Clara finally looked up. "That's either remarkable incompetence or deliberate fraud. Which would you prefer I note in the records?" Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Garrett will hear about this. I certainly hope so. I report to him weekly. After he stormed out, Cookie appeared in the doorway, grinning. That was better than a theater show. Henderson's been cheating every outfit in the territory for years. Not this one. Not anymore. Word of the confrontation spread through camp by evening meal. Clara noticed a change. The men spoke to her more freely, including her in conversations about everything from timber prices to weather predictions. She was no longer just the bookkeeper, but Miss Clara, who'd faced down Henderson without blinking. Luke returned 2 days later, trail-worn and dusty. He listened to her report about Henderson, mouth quirking at the corners. Honest mistakes, was it? Remarkably consistent ones, always in his favor. And you offered to simply deduct the overcharges. It seemed the Christian thing to do, more charitable than accusations of theft. He laughed then, a rich sound she'd rarely heard. Henderson's probably halfway to Denver by now, terrified you'll audit his other accounts. Should I? If you've got time, but Clara. His expression grew serious. You're making enemies, powerful ones. Henderson's connected to half the business owners in town, including Morrison and Pritchard, especially them. Clara straightened the papers on her desk. Then perhaps they should have thought of that before trying to cheat you. I'm not backing down because some men don't like their schemes exposed. Didn't think you would, just want you prepared. That Sunday, Clara took Mrs. Holcomb's advice and went to town. The reception at church was frigid women who'd begun to thaw after the dance turned away, following their husbands' leads. But a few nodded greeting, including the woman whose husband had received his back pay. After the service, she visited Mrs. Holcomb, finding her in the kitchen wrestling with bread dough. Heard you sent Henderson packing, the older woman said without preamble. Word travels fast. Faster when it involves someone's pocketbook. Pritchard's been raging about uppity women who don't understand business. I understand it well enough to know theft when I see it. That's what has them scared. Mrs. Holcomb punched the dough down. A woman who can read and figure is dangerous. A woman who can do both and isn't afraid to speak up, that's revolution. Clara helped shape the loaves, finding comfort in the familiar work. I'm not trying to start a revolution, just do my job. Sometimes they're the same thing. As she walked back through town, Clara passed the Mercantile where Morrison stood talking with Pritchard and Henderson. They fell silent as she approached, watching her with expressions that promised trouble. She kept walking, head high, hand brushing the pocket where the derringer rested. At the edge of town, Luke waited with a wagon. Figured you might want to ride back. How did you know I'd come to town? Lucky guess. He helped her up. Also, Cookie threatened to quit if someone didn't bring back coffee. The man has priorities. They rode in comfortable silence until the town disappeared behind them. Then Luke spoke. Henderson's pulling his contracts. Says he won't work with an outfit that employs unwomanly females. Clara's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cost you business. You didn't. I've got 3 other mills eager for our timber, and they won't cheat on invoices. He glanced at her. But it's starting. Clara, the push to force you out. What do you want me to do? What you've been doing. Your job. His hands tightened on the reins. I told you before I don't run scared from men like Morrison. Neither should you. The camp came into view as the sun began to set, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of the dinner bell carrying on the wind. It wasn't the home Clara had imagined when she'd boarded that train in Ohio. But it was becoming home nonetheless, one ledger, one confrontation, one small victory at a time. Thank you, she said as they pulled up to her cabin, for standing by me. Thank you for making it worthwhile. He handed down the coffee for Cookie. Fair warning, I've got more invoices from other suppliers that need reviewing. You might find more honest mistakes. I'll sharpen my pencils. That's what I figured. He touched his hat and drove off, leaving Clara standing in front of her cabin as stars began to appear. She thought about Morrison and Pritchard, plotting in the mercantile, about Henderson's rage and the cold shoulders at church. The forces arraying against her were growing stronger. But so was she. Each balanced account, each exposed fraud. Each day she proved her worth. These were her weapons. Let them come with their gossip and threats. She had work to do, and no bitter man's pride would stop her from doing it. The Derringer sat heavy in her pocket as she entered the cabin, but heavier still was her determination. She'd traveled 3,000 miles to build a new life. She'd be damned if she'd let anyone tear it down now. November arrived with teeth, bringing snow that transformed the camp into something from a fairy tale, if fairy tales included frozen wash water and men cursing at iced-over equipment. Clara had settled into the rhythm of camp life, her days filled with ledgers and her evenings with mending by the stove. The isolation might have crushed another woman, but she found peace in the orderly columns of numbers and the respectful distance the men maintained. The church social was Mrs. Holcomb's idea, delivered via Dutch during a supply run. "She says you're turning into a hermit," he reported, handing over a parcel of warm stockings the older woman had sent. "Says it ain't natural, a young woman hiding up here like some prospector." "I'm not hiding, I'm working." "Same difference. According to her," Dutch spit tobacco juice into the snow. "There's to be a box social after church. Ladies make suppers. Men bid on them. Money goes to the church roof fund." Clara knew about box socials, courting events disguised as charity. "I'm not looking for a suitor." "Don't matter. Mrs. Holcomb says you're going. And when that woman sets her mind to something—" He shrugged eloquently. Which was how Clara found herself in town that Saturday, a carefully packed basket at her feet, wearing her good dress despite the cold. The church hall buzzed with anticipation, young women giggling behind their hands while men counted their coins. Clara placed her basket marked with a simple blue ribbon among the others and tried to fade into the wallpaper. "Well, well." Pritchard's voice slithered across the room. "The mountain woman graces us with her presence." Clara ignored him, focusing on the minister's wife, who was organizing the auction, but Pritchard wasn't finished. "Gentlemen, we have a rare opportunity tonight, a chance to dine with the woman who single-handedly drove Henderson's mill to relocate. Perhaps she'll share her secrets of destroying honest businesses." "That's enough, Walter." The voice was quiet, but carried authority. Clara turned to find Judge Thornton, a man she'd seen but never met. His face was weathered but kind, his eyes sharp. "Miss Mayfield exposed theft. Nothing more. Henderson chose to leave rather than make restitution." "You're taking her side," Pritchard's voice rose. "I'm taking the side of accurate bookkeeping, something this town could use more of." The judge moved past them to examine the baskets. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I intend to bid on a meal that doesn't come from my own bachelor cooking." The auction began with the younger women's baskets. Amid much giggling and staged drama, Clara watched from her corner, wondering how soon she could politely leave. Then the auctioneer Tom Bradley, whose back pay she'd recovered, held up her basket. "Ladies and gentlemen, this here basket comes with a fine spread of fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. Who'll start the bidding?" Silence. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks as the moment stretched. Then, $2. Luke Garrett stepped out from the back of the room, still in his work clothes, sawdust in his hair. $2.50, Morrison countered, his smile unpleasant. $3. $4. The room grew quiet, everyone sensing undercurrents beyond a simple meal. Morrison's face showed a determination that had nothing to do with fried chicken. $5. He declared. $10. Luke's voice was flat, final. Gasps echoed through the hall. $10 was more than most men earned in a week. Morrison's face flushed, but even his pride had limits. He shook his head. Conceding. Sold to Mr. Garrett for $10. Bradley seemed delighted. That'll patch a good portion of the roof, I'd say. Luke collected the basket and made his way to Clara. Shall we find a place to enjoy this feast? They ended up on the church steps, despite the cold, inside. The social continued with dancing and laughter, but Clara felt more comfortable in the crisp air. Luke unpacked the meal with appreciation. This is fine cooking. Mrs. Holcomb helped. My biscuits tend toward the heavy side. Nothing wrong with substantial food. He bit into the chicken. Morrison would have made a scene if he'd won. I know. Thank you for preventing it. Wasn't charity. Clara, man's gotta eat, and Cookie's idea of seasoning is more salt. He paused. Plus, I wanted to talk to you away from the camp. Got a proposition. Clara tensed. Oh, business proposition, he clarified, seeming to read her concern. The railroad contract came through at the prices you suggested. They want double our usual output, which means expanding. I need someone to manage the whole operation while I handle the lumber side. Someone who understands contracts, can negotiate with suppliers, keep the men in line. You want me to run your business? Want you to help run our business? Full partner, 30% share. You've earned it with what you've saved us already. Clara set down her biscuit, hands trembling slightly. Luke, partnerships require capital. I have nothing to invest. You've already invested. Your work, your courage standing up to Henderson and his ilk, that's worth more than money. The town will riot. A woman as business partner. Let them. We'll have contracts they need. Lumber they can't get elsewhere. Money talks louder than gossip. From inside came the sound of fiddle music starting up. Luke stood, offering his hand. Dance with me. Out here. Why not? We can hear the music fine. She took his hand, letting him draw her into a waltz on the church's narrow porch. It was awkward, confined, but his hand was warm on her waist, his presence solid and real. I need to think about your offer, she said. Take your time. It's not going anywhere. He spun her carefully, avoiding a patch of ice. Clara, can I ask you something? Yes. Do you regret coming West Truth now? She considered as they moved together. I regret Morrison's deception. I regret the wasted hope. But coming here, she met his eyes. No, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. What's that? Myself. The person I am when I'm not trying to fit someone else's idea of what I should be. The music ended, but Luke didn't release her immediately. That person, he said quietly, is worth 10 of Morrison and his kind. The church door burst open, spilling light in a crowd of people. Among them was Morrison himself, Pritchard at his shoulder. How touching, Morrison sneered. The lumberman and his bookkeeper. Tell me, Garrett, does she keep your personal accounts as carefully as your business ones? Luke stepped forward, but Clara caught his arm. Mr. Morrison, your implications are as weak as your character. I'd pity you if you weren't so determinedly pathetic. You sharp-tongued... Careful. Judge Thornton appeared, along with several other men. Finish that sentence and I'll hold you in contempt of common decency. Miss Mayfield, Mr. Garrett, I believe the dancing has moved inside, if you'd care to join. It was a clear dismissal of Morrison and his allies. Clara and Luke followed the judge inside, where they were immediately absorbed into a reel. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and movement. Not everyone was friendly, but enough were that Clara felt the shift, the beginning of acceptance earned through work and integrity. As Luke drove her back to the camp, the moon painting everything silver, Clara made her decision. I'll take the partnership, on one condition. Name it. I want to use some profits to start a school. The men's children need education, and I could teach evenings. Luke was quiet for a moment. Sarah wanted to start a school. Never got the chance. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No, it's good. Right, even she'd have liked knowing it finally happened. He glanced at her. Partners. Partners. They shook hands solemnly, there in the moonlit wagon, sealing a bargain that would shake Bitter Creek to its foundations. The news spread like wildfire. By Monday, Clara faced a stream of visitors, some supportive, others appalled. Tom Bradley's wife brought cookies and an offer to help with the school. Pritchard sent a letter threatening legal action on grounds of female incapacity, which Judge Thornton personally tore up in the camp office. Buffoon, the judge muttered, as if competence were determined by anatomy rather than ability. Luke handled the male objectors with characteristic directness. When a lumber buyer suggested he'd take his business elsewhere rather than deal with a petticoat partner, Luke showed him the door. Don't need his business. He told Clara afterward. Man who judges worth by trousers isn't smart enough to recognize quality lumber anyway. The partnership papers were drawn up by week's end. Clara signed her name with a steady hand, aware of the magnitude of the moment. She was no longer just an employee or even a bookkeeper, she was a business owner, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. That evening, the camp held an impromptu celebration. Cookie made a cake. The men pooled money for a gift, a leather portfolio with C. Mayfield Partner embossed in gold. Even Dutch, usually taciturn as stone, offered congratulations. You've earned it, he said simply. Anyone says different. They haven't been paying attention. Clara stood before them all, these rough men who'd become her allies, and felt her throat tighten. When I came west, I thought I knew what I wanted. I was wrong. This working with all of you, building something real, this is better than anything I imagined. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. You proved yourself the day you stood up to Henderson. Someone called out. Rest was just details. Laughter filled the cookhouse, and Clara let it wash over her. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside was warmth and acceptance and the promise of tomorrow's work. Luke walked her to her cabin afterward, both of them quiet in the snowy hush. At her door, he paused. You know this changes things. Partnership means we're bound together now, in business at least. I know. And you're sure? Clara looked up at him. This man who'd offered trust when others offered scorn, who'd seen her worth when she'd barely seen it herself. I'm sure. He nodded, touched his hat, and disappeared into the swirling snow. Clara entered her cabin and lit the lamp, its glow falling on the partnership papers she'd placed on the table. Tomorrow would bring challenges Morrison's rage, Pritchard's schemes, the 1,000 obstacles facing a woman in business. But tonight, she was Clara Mayfield, partner in Garrett Lumber Company, teacher-to-be, woman of property and purpose. She'd traveled 3,000 miles to become someone's wife and instead became herself. It was, she thought as she prepared for bed, a far better bargain. The confrontation came on a Tuesday, when the December cold had turned the ground to iron and breath hung in the air like accusations. Clara was in the office, reviewing contracts for the expanded railroad delivery, when voices rose outside Morrison's cultured sneer mixing with rougher tones she didn't recognize. The door burst open without ceremony. Morrison stood there with two men who looked like trouble incarnate hired muscle from the mining camps, most likely behind them. She glimpsed some of the lumber crew gathering, alerted by the disturbance. Miss Mayfield. Morrison stepped inside, tracking mud across her clean floor. Or should I say, Partner Mayfield, how the mighty have risen. Clara set down her pen carefully. State your business. Mr. Morrison, some of us have actual work to do. My business is justice. You've poisoned this entire region against legitimate businessmen. First Henderson. Now others are being questioned about their invoices. His face twisted. All because a rejected spinster wants revenge. Is that what you tell yourself? Clara stood, glad for once of her height. "That this is about rejection, Mr. Mount Morrison. I've forgotten you as thoroughly as yesterday's dishwater. What I haven't forgotten is theft, fraud, and the systematic cheating of honest workers." One of the hired men stepped forward. "Lady needs to learn respect." The click of a hammer being cocked froze everyone. Dutch stood in the doorway, rifle casual in his hands but pointed in the troublemaker's general direction. "Anyone touches Miss Clara answers to me, and then to Garrett. What's left answers to Cookie. And he's particular about his kitchen knives." More lumber workers appeared, carrying axes and cant hooks like they just happened to wander by. The message was clear. Clara was under their protection. Morrison's face went pale, then red. "You think these men will always be around? You think Garrett can watch you forever?" "I think," Clara said evenly, "that you're trespassing on company property. Leave now, or I'll have Judge Thornton issue a warrant." "This isn't over," Morrison snarled. "A woman like you, putting on airs, pretending to be something you're not." "I'm exactly what I am," Clara interrupted. "A partner in a legitimate business, a keeper of honest books, and someone who won't be intimidated by a man who lacks the courage to face his own character. Now get out." They left, but the threat lingered like smoke. Dutch stationed himself outside the office for the rest of the day, and Cookie insisted she take supper in the kitchen rather than walk to the cookhouse alone. Luke returned from town that evening, face like thunder. Word had already reached him about Morrison's visit. "I should have been here." He paced her office like a caged cougar. "Should have known he'd try something." "The men handled it. I handled it." Clara forced her voice to stay calm, though her hand still shook slightly. "This was always going to happen. Luke, men like Morrison can't stand being shown up, especially by a woman." "Doesn't mean I have to like it." He stopped pacing, looked at her directly. "I've arranged for rotating guards. The men volunteered. You've earned their loyalty." "I don't want to live in fear." "Then don't, but be smart about it." He pulled something from his coat, a heavier pistol than the Derringer. "This has better range and stopping power. Practice with it." Clara took the weapon, its weight significant. "You think it'll come to that?" "I think Morrison's desperate and Pritchard's backing him. Desperate men do foolish things." The next few days passed intense vigilance. Clara went about her work, but always aware of footsteps, of shadows, of the guards discreetly keeping watch. The school planning continued. 3 families had already promised their children would attend, and Tom Bradley offered lumber for desks at cost. It was Thursday when everything exploded. Clara had stayed late in the office, finishing payroll by lamplight. The guard, young Billy Morrison, no relation to Samuel, had stepped away briefly. Nature calling. In those few minutes, everything changed. She heard the door open, assumed it was Billy returning. "Almost finished here," she said without looking up. "Good. We can settle accounts properly then." Clara's head snapped up. Morrison stood there alone this time. Something wild in his eyes. The smell of whiskey rolled off him in waves. "Get out!" She reached for the pistol in her drawer. He moved faster than she expected for a drunk man, slamming the drawer shut on her fingers. Clara cried out, jerking back, and he grabbed her wrist. "Not this time. This time you're going to listen." His grip tightened painfully. "You cost me everything. My reputation, my standing. You cost yourself those things." Clara tried to pull free. "Let go." "Henderson left because of you. Pritchard's bank is being investigated because of your meddling. Even Judge Thornton questions my contracts now." He shook her. A man's whole life ruined because one woman couldn't accept her place. Clara brought her knee up sharp, catching him in the thigh. He cursed, loosening his grip enough for her to wrench away. She dove for the desk drawer again, but he caught her shoulder, spinning her around. "You're nothing but a—" The door exploded inward. Luke filled the frame, took in the scene in one glance, and moved. His fist connected with Morrison's jaw with a crack like breaking timber. Morrison went down hard, didn't get up. "Clara." Luke's hands were gentle as he checked her wrist, already bruising. Are you hurt?" "I'm all right." She wasn't, not really, but the words came automatically. Billy burst in, face white with horror. "Miss Clara, I'm sorry. I was only gone a minute." "Not your fault, boy," Luke said, not taking his eyes off Clara. "Go fetch Dutch and some rope, then ride for Judge Thornton." As Billy ran off, Luke guided Clara to a chair. His hands shook slightly as he poured water from the pitcher, wetting his handkerchief to wrap around her wrist. "I should have shot him at the dance," he said quietly. "Should have ended this then." "You're not a killer, Luke." "I could be, for you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara looked up at him. This man who'd shown her nothing but respect and trust, who'd made her a partner when the world said she was nothing. "Luke." "I know." He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I know you came here for another man, that you're not looking for, but Clara, I was wrong about what I was looking for." The words tumbled out. "I thought I wanted security, position, someone to take care of me. But what I needed was someone who'd let me stand on my own feet, who'd see me as a person, not a problem to solve or a decoration to display." His hand was warm against her cheek. "You're so much more than that." Morrison groaned from the floor, breaking the moment. Dutch arrived with rope and efficiently trussed him up like a calf for branding. Judge Thornton appeared within the hour, took statements, and had Morrison hauled to town for formal charges: assault, attempted battery, trespassing. The judge listed. "He'll see jail time for this. And Miss Mayfield, if you want to press additional charges for the harassment." "I want him gone," Clara said firmly. "Away from this town, this territory if possible." "That can be arranged. A man's got debts enough to motivate a quick departure." The judge tipped his hat. "You've done this community a service, exposing the rot. Don't let anyone tell you different." After everyone left, Luke and Clara stood alone in the office. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I meant what I said." Luke's voice was rough. "About what I'd do for you. But I need you to know it's not about protecting you. You've proven you can protect yourself. It's about," he struggled for words, "it's about wanting to face whatever comes together, as partners in everything, not just business." Clara's heart thundered in her chest. "Luke Garrett, are you proposing?" "I'm proposing a possibility, when you're ready, if you ever are." He took her uninjured hand. "I know you've had enough of men making promises, but I'd like to prove that some of us keep them." She thought of the letters that had brought her here, full of false promises and pretty lies. Then she thought of Luke's steady presence, his quiet support, the way he'd never once tried to make her smaller so he could feel bigger. "I don't need promises," she said. "I need truth, partnership, respect. You have all of those. Then I suppose we should see what else we might have." She squeezed his hand. "Slowly, carefully. I won't be rushed into anything again. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." He lifted her hand, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Though I should warn you, the men have a betting pool on when I'd finally speak up. Dutch just won $20. Clara laughed, surprising herself. After the fear and violence of the evening, laughter felt like defiance. "Then I suppose we'd better make it worth their investment." Luke smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I suppose we should." They stood there in the lamplight, hands linked. While outside, the winter wind howled through the pines. Morrison was gone. His threats ended. The partnership thrived. The school would soon begin. And something new grew between them, not the desperate grab for security that had brought her west, but a connection built on mutual respect and slowly blooming affection. Clara had traveled 3,000 miles expecting one life and finding another entirely. As Luke walked her to her cabin, their breath misting in the cold air, she realized that sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach. The blizzard struck on the 2nd day of January, transforming the world into a howlin' white void. Clara had weathered storms in Ohio, but nothing like this mountain fury that seemed intent on erasing the very landscape. She'd spent the morning in the office, but as the storm intensified, Luke ordered everyone to shelter. "This is a bad one," Dutch declared, squinting at the sky. "Seen that look before. We'll be buried by nightfall." The men worked frantically to secure equipment and move supplies under cover. Clara helped where she could, her hands now as calloused as any worker's. The partnership had changed her. She no longer stood apart from the camp's rhythms, but moved within them, essential as any gear in the machine. By afternoon, visibility had dropped to mere feet. Luke appeared at the office door, snow-covered and urgent. "You can't stay in the cabin tonight. Too isolated. Cookie's clearing space in the kitchen storeroom. It'll be warmer there. Closer to help if needed." Clara wanted to protest, to insist she could manage alone, but the wind scream drowned pride. She gathered essentials and followed Luke, clinging to the rope he'd strung between buildings. Even that short journey left her gasping, ice crystals forming on her lashes. The cookhouse kitchen was organized chaos. Cookie had indeed cleared a corner of the storeroom, creating a makeshift quarters with blankets and a small stove. Several men had already taken shelter in the main room, those whose cabins were too far or too flimsy for the storm. "Going to be a long night," Cookie said, ladling out coffee strong enough to float horseshoes. "Maybe longer. Storm like this can last days." As darkness fell, the full fury hit. The building shook under the assault, wind finding every crack and crevice. The men played cards by lamplight, their usual jokes subdued. Clara worked on the account books, needing the familiar comfort of numbers. Near midnight, the door burst open in a spray of snow. Tom Bradley stumbled in, half frozen, supporting another figure. Clara's heart stopped. It was Luke, his face gray, blood on his temple. Beam came down in the equipment shed. Tom gasped. "Caught him when he was checking the roof." Clara was moving before thought formed, helping them get Luke to a bench. He was conscious but dazed, a nasty gash above his left eye. She pressed a clean cloth to the wound, trying to stay calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Just a knock," Luke mumbled. "Had worse from stubborn mules." "Hush." Clara's hands were steady as she examined the cut. Her mother had taught her basic doctoring farm life demanded it. "Cookie, I need hot water, clean bandages, and whiskey." "The drinking kind or the pouring kind?" Despite his joke, Cookie moved quickly. Clara cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency, aware of Luke watching her through pain-narrowed eyes. The cut was deep but clean. No debris embedded. She used the whiskey to cleanse it, Luke hissed, but didn't pull away, then stitched it closed with a neat, small sutures. "Where'd you learn that?" Tom asked, impressed. "My mother was the closest thing to a doctor in 3 counties. She made sure I knew the basics." Clara tied off the bandage. "He needs rest and watching. Head wounds can be tricky." "I'm fine," Luke protested, trying to stand. The world tilted, and he sat back hard. "You're stubborn, is what you are." Clara turned to Cookie. "Can we make him comfortable here? I don't want him alone in his cabin. Not with that concussion." They created a bed near the stove, and Clara stationed herself beside it. The storm raged on, but inside the cookhouse, a different atmosphere developed. Someone produced a harmonica, another a fiddle. Quiet music filled the space, competing with the wind's howl. "This reminds me of the winter of 68 inches, Dutch said suddenly. "Trapped for 4 days in a line shack with 3 other fools and 1 deck of cards." Stories began to flow, tales of other storms, other struggles, The small triumphs and large disasters that made up life on the frontier. Clara found herself drawn in, these rough men revealing depth she hadn't suspected. Young Billy Morrison spoke of losing his parents to fever, making his way west alone at 14. Cookie, it turned out, had been a chef in San Francisco before a gambling debt sent him to the mountains. Even Dutch unbent enough to mention a wife, dead now 20 years, and children somewhere in California. "What about you, Miss Clara?" Billy asked. "What made you leave everything behind?" Clara considered, glancing at Luke, who dozed fitfully beside her. "I thought I was running to something: marriage, security, a new life. But really, I think I was running from something too. From being small, confined, limited by what others thought I should be." "Found what you were looking for?" Cookie asked. "Found something better. Found out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else's idea of proper—" The wind screamed louder, and the building creaked ominously. But inside, warmed by stove and companionship, the storm felt distant. Clara kept watch over Luke, checking his pupils, monitoring his breathing. Occasionally, he'd wake, confused, and she'd soothe him back to rest. "You're good for him," Dutch observed during one of these moments. "Haven't seen him let anyone fuss over him since Sarah died." "I'm not fussing. I'm providing medical care." "Call it what you want. Man's been alone too long, building walls out of work and whiskey. You got past those walls somehow?" Dawn came without visible change. The world remained white and howling. But inside, routines reasserted themselves. Cookie managed breakfast despite the conditions. The men organized watches and work details. Clara divided her time between Luke and the account books, determined not to fall behind despite the crisis. Luke woke properly near noon, clear-eyed and embarrassed. "You stayed up all night. Someone had to make sure you didn't die of stubbornness." She checked his bandage, satisfied to find no fresh bleeding. "How's your head?" "Hurts like the devil, but I've had worse hangovers." He caught her hand as she moved to rise. "Clara, thank you. If partners look after each other, is that what we are, just partners?" Before she could answer, a crash shook the building. Part of the roof in the main room gave way under the snow's weight, sending men scrambling. The next hours were a battle clearing snow, bracing beams, fighting to keep their shelter intact. Clara worked alongside the men, holding boards while they hammered, hauling debris, ignoring the cold that bit through her gloves. When Tom Bradley slipped on ice, nearly falling from a ladder, she caught him, her height and strength finally advantages rather than embarrassments. "I reckon we're lucky to have you, Miss Clara," Tom gasped. "In all ways." By the time they'd secured the roof, everyone was exhausted. But the storm showed signs of weakening, wind dropping from howl to moan. Cookie produced a meal from somewhere: beans and salt pork, but it tasted like a feast. That night, the second, trapped together, something had changed. Clara was no longer a guest or outsider, but fully part of the camp's fabric. When young Billy's cough worsened, she dosed him with honey and whiskey. When Cookie burned his hand on the stove, she treated it without being asked. She'd become essential in ways beyond bookkeeping. Luke, despite her protests, insisted on sitting up, claiming his head felt better. They sat together near the stove while around them the camp slept. "This isn't how I imagined it," he said quietly. "What?" "Courting you, had visions of proper calls, maybe a picnic when spring came, not being trapped in a cookhouse while you stitch my fool head closed." "I've had my fill of proper courting," Clara replied. "Letters full of pretty lies, promises that evaporated at first sight. This—" She gestured at the sleeping men, the storm-battered building, their own disheveled state. "This is real, true. Messy is what it is. Life's messy, but it's honest mess." She touched his bandage gently. "I'd rather have honest mess than pretty lies any day." He caught her hand, held it. When this storm ends, things go back to normal. You might feel different then. I might, but I doubt it. She met his eyes. I've learned to trust my judgment. Luke, about books, about business, about people. Dawn of the third day brought silence. The storm had blown itself out, leaving a world transformed. Drifts reached the eaves in places, trees bent or broken under the weight. But the sun emerged, turning everything to crystal. The work of digging out began immediately. Clara joined in, no one questioning her presence. They were a team forged by crisis, and she'd proven herself as thoroughly as any man. It took most of the day to clear paths between buildings, to check on cabins and equipment. Miraculously, they'd lost no one, though several cabins would need repair. As Clara updated the damage assessments in her ledgers, she felt a deep satisfaction. They'd survived, all of them, by working together. That evening, in the cookhouse over a celebratory meal, Dutch raised his coffee cup. To weathering the storm, all kinds of storms. The men cheered, and Clara felt Luke's hand find hers under the table. She squeezed it, understanding flowing between them without words. They'd been tested by nature and emerged stronger. Whatever storms Morrison or Pritchard or the gossips of Bitter Creek might brew seemed insignificant compared to what they'd just endured. 2 partnerships, Luke added, his own cup raised, in business and otherwise. More cheers, some knowing looks. Clara didn't blush. She'd moved past the need for others' approval, finding her worth in ledgers that balanced, men who respected her work, and a partnership built on truth rather than pretense. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained, in the face of nature's fury. The things that supposedly mattered: social position, proper behavior. Others' opinions proved as insubstantial as snow. What mattered was character, cooperation, the willingness to work for survival and support each other. As the evening wound down and Clara finally returned to her cabin, Luke insisting on escorting her despite her protests about his head, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 3,000 miles to find herself trapped in a cookhouse during a blizzard, nursing an injured man who saw her as an equal, working alongside people who judged her by her actions rather than her past. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was infinitely better. The spring thaw brought mud, melting snow, and Walter Pritchard's last desperate gambit. Clara discovered it on a Tuesday morning when she arrived at the Bitter Creek Bank to deposit the lumber company's earnings. The clerk, usually friendly since she'd started bringing significant deposits, avoided her eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Mayfield, but Mr. Pritchard wants to see you before we can accept this." Clara's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Regarding what matter?" "He'll explain." Pritchard's office reeked of cigars and self-importance. He didn't rise when she entered, a calculated insult she chose to ignore. Spread across his desk were papers she recognized with a chill: the partnership documents, Luke's loan papers, even copies of contracts she'd negotiated. Miss Mayfield. His smile reminded her of a snake digesting a mouse. Or should I say, Miss Mayfield the fraud. "I don't know what game you're playing, Mr. Pritchard, but—" "No game." He tapped the papers. "I've been investigating your so-called partnership with Mr. Garrett. Fascinating reading. Did you know that in Wyoming territory, women can't enter binding business contracts without male guardianship approval?" Clara's blood ran cold. "That's not—" "Oh, but it is. Obscure law, rarely enforced, but quite clear. Since you have no husband, father, or appointed guardian, your partnership is legally void." His smile widened. "Which means, Mr. Garrett has been operating fraudulently, claiming tax benefits and contract advantages based on an invalid partnership. You're twisting the law to suit your purposes. I'm protecting the business community from unscrupulous practices." He leaned back. "Of course, this could all go away. Mr. Garrett signs over 30% of his company to a legitimate buyer myself, for instance, and I forget what I've discovered. Clara stood slowly, rage replacing shock. Extortion, that's what this is. Business, Miss Mayfield. Something you're clearly not equipped to understand. She left without another word, her mind racing. By the time she reached the lumber camp, she'd formulated a plan. Luke took the news better than expected, his jaw tight but his voice calm. Always knew Pritchard would make his move eventually, he said. Question is, what do we do about it? We fight. Clara pulled out her own papers. I've been researching too. That law he's citing, it was repealed 2 years ago by territorial legislature. The repeal just hasn't been properly recorded in Bitter Creek because Surprise Pritchard is responsible for maintaining those records. Luke's eyes gleamed. You have proof. Judge Thornton helped me obtain copies from the territorial capital. He's been suspicious of Pritchard's record-keeping for years. She smiled grimly. We also discovered something else. Pritchard's been embezzling from the town treasury. Small amounts, but consistent. The evidence is all there in the public records. If anyone bothered to look. And you bothered. I'm thorough. Luke stood, pacing to the window. If we expose him, he'll fight dirty. Morrison was nothing compared to what Pritchard could do. Then we'd better fight smart. Clara joined him at the window, looking out at the camp bustling with spring activity. I've already sent copies of everything to the territorial prosecutor. Judge Thornton is personally delivering them, but Pritchard doesn't know that yet. You've been busy. I've been angry. She turned to face him. Men like Pritchard think they own the world, that they can crush anyone who doesn't bow to them. I'm tired of bowing. Luke studied her face, then nodded. What do you need from me? A trust, and maybe some of that backbone you're famous for. The confrontation came 3 days later at a special town meeting Pritchard had called to discuss irregularities in local business practices. Everyone knew he meant Clara and Luke. The hall was packed, the atmosphere tense as a drawn bowstring. Pritchard stood before the assembled crowd like a preacher ready to condemn sin. Friends, we face a crisis of proper conduct in our community. Women forgetting their place. Men enabling this breakdown of natural order. What we face, Judge Thornton interrupted, rising from his seat, is a crisis of corruption. Mr. Pritchard, you've been served. The sheriff, looking deeply uncomfortable, handed Pritchard an official document. The banker's face went from red to white as he read, This is preposterous embezzlement. I have served this town faithfully. You've served yourself, Clara said, standing. Every transaction recorded, every penny tracked. You were so busy trying to destroy others. You got sloppy with your own crimes. The crowd erupted. Some shouted support for Pritchard. Others demanded answers. Through it all, Luke stood silent beside Clara, his presence a shield against the chaos. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, his voice cutting through the noise. The supposed law, Mr. Pritchard has been citing was repealed 2 years ago. Miss Mayfield's partnership is entirely legal, as are all contracts negotiated under it. Pritchard's supporters began melting away, rats deserting a sinking ship. The banker himself seemed to shrink, blustering denials that convinced no one. You did this, he snarled at Clara. You poisonous woman! You've destroyed. I've balanced the books, Clara interrupted calmly. That's all. The numbers don't lie. Mr. Pritchard, you should have remembered that. What followed was swift. The territorial prosecutor arrived the next day. Pritchard was arrested. And suddenly everyone in Bitter Creek had always known he was crooked. Clara found it grimly amusing how quickly the tide turned. But the victory came with unexpected consequences. With Pritchard gone and Morrison long fled, a power vacuum opened in the town. Business owners who'd relied on Pritchard's bank scrambled for alternatives. The town council, half of whom had been in Pritchard's pocket, found themselves adrift. It was Tom Bradley who suggested the solution. "Miss Clara, you've got the head for it. Why don't you start a bank? A honest one." The idea was audacious. A woman banker was almost unheard of. But as Clara considered it, discussing it with Luke over dinner in her cabin, the possibility took shape. "I have the capital now, so on," she said, "from the partnership profits. And people trust me with their money, I've proven that." "It's a big step from bookkeeping to banking," Luke pointed out, though his eyes showed he was already convinced. "Everything's been a big step. Coming west, standing up to Morrison, becoming your partner. What's one more step together? You mean—" He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Clara, we've been dancing around this for months. I think it's time we spoke plain." Her heart accelerated. "Luke?" "Let me finish. I know you came here with one dream that turned to ash. I know you've built something new, something yours. I'm not asking you to give that up. I'm asking if there's room in that new dream for an old lumberman who's been half in love with you since you faced down Henderson without blinking." Clara turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. "Only half?" "All right, fully, completely, desperately." His voice roughened. "I love your strength, your integrity, the way you see straight through to the truth of things. I love that you've made my men better workers just by expecting them to be, I love." "Luke," she squeezed his hand, "I love you too. Have for a while now, though I was scared to admit it, scared to trust again." "And now?" "Now I know the difference between pretty words and true ones. Everything you've shown me has been true." She stood, moving around the table to him. "I don't need promises of an easy life or a perfect future. I just need to know we'll face whatever comes as we have been together." He rose, pulling her into his arms. "That I can promise. Together. Come hell or high water or Pritchard's cousins seeking revenge." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Garrett?" "It's whatever you want it to be. Marriage, partnership, or just the promise that I'll stand beside you whether you're keeping books or running a bank or taking on the whole territorial government." Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Let's start with the bank and see where it leads. Though—" She pulled back to look at him. "I wouldn't be opposed to making things official. Eventually. When we're ready." "When you're ready," he corrected. "I've been ready since you told Morrison exactly what kind of man he was in front of the whole town." They were married 6 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the lumber camp with the crew as witnesses. Clara wore the blue dress from the harvest dance. Luke wore his best suit, and Dutch won another $20 in the betting pool. Judge Thornton officiated, his eyes twinkling as he pronounced them partners in all things, legal and otherwise. Cookie made a cake that was more enthusiasm than skill, and the men pooled resources for a gift, a bronze plaque reading Mayfield Garrett Enterprises, for the new bank building. As spring turned to summer, Clara's bank opened its doors. Former customers of Pritchard's institution flocked to her, trusting their money to someone who'd proven her honesty with every exposed fraud and balanced ledger. The school started too, with Clara teaching evenings and a young woman from Denver taking day classes. Morrison's name became a cautionary tale. Pritchard's a byword for corruption, but Clara rarely thought of them anymore. She was too busy building a business, a school, a life with Luke that bore no resemblance to the narrow existence she'd once thought was her only option. On a warm evening in July, she stood with Luke on the porch of their new house built halfway between the lumber camp and town, a compromise that suited them both. The setting sun painted the mountains gold, and somewhere a meadowlark sang its liquid song. "Any regrets?" Luke asked, his arm comfortable around her waist. Clara considered. "One." He tensed slightly. "Oh. I regret it took me so long to realize that the best things in life aren't the ones we planned for." She leaned into him. "If I'd married Morrison, I'd be a decoration in some ranch house, small and silent and slowly dying inside. Instead, I found you, found myself, found a life I never dared imagine. So really, we should thank Morrison for being a coward. Let's not go that far. She laughed. But yes, I suppose his rejection was the greatest gift he could have given me. It set me free to become who I was meant to be. And who's that? Clara Mayfield Garrett, banker, teacher, partner, and wife. Finder of frauds and balancer of books. Woman who knows her own worth and doesn't need anyone else's validation to prove it. Luke turned her to face him, his eyes warm with love and pride. Forgot one thing. What's that? The woman who took on the worst of Bitter Creek and won, who showed this whole territory that character matters more than convention. As he kissed her, the mountains stood witness to their contentment. She'd traveled 3,000 miles seeking one life and found another richer, truer, and entirely her own. The ledgers of her life had finally balanced, and the sum was greater than she'd ever dared calculate. In the distance, a train whistle echoed another arrival to Bitter Creek, another soul seeking something new. Clara smiled against Luke's lips. Whatever storms tomorrow might bring, she was ready to weather them. After all, she'd proven that even the fiercest blizzard was no match for a determined woman with a good head for figures and a partner who saw her true worth. The autumn moon hung full and bright over Bitter Creek, casting silver light through the windows of Clara and Luke's home. It had been a year since their wedding, a year of building and growth that had transformed both the lumber business and Clara's bank into cornerstones of the community. Tonight, however, Clara sat at her kitchen table with the ledgers of a different sort, personal ones that carried a secret she'd only just confirmed. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Luke was at the camp, overseeing a night shipment, so Clara answered it herself, finding Mrs. Holcomb on the porch. "Thought you might need some company," the older woman said, holding up a basket. "And I brought tea, the kind that settles nervous stomachs." Clara's hand went unconsciously to her midsection. "How did you—" "Child, I've been watching women longer than you've been alive. You've got that look." Mrs. Holcomb bustled inside, already reaching for the kettle. "Besides, you turned green at the smell of Cookie's bacon last week. Dead giveaway." They sat together as the tea steeped, the comfortable silence of old friends filling the space. Through the window, Clara could see the lights of Bitter Creek spread below, so different from the hostile place she'd first encountered. "Are you happy about it, Mrs.?" Holcomb asked gently. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "Happy, yes, but terrified. I've built so much, worked so hard to be seen as capable, strong. What if you're human? What if you can be both a mother and a businesswoman?" Mrs. Holcomb poured the tea with steady hands. "Clara, you've already broken every rule this town had. What's one more?" The door opened again, bringing Luke and a gust of cool air. He took one look at the scene his wife, Mrs. Holcomb. The special tea and understanding dawned on his face. "Clara." She nodded, suddenly unable to speak. In 2 strides he was beside her, dropping to his knees, his hands gentle on hers. "How long have you known—" "2 weeks. I wanted to be certain." She searched his face. "I know this changes things. The bank, the partnership. Changes things for the better." His voice was thick with emotion. "Clara, do you remember what I told you, partners in everything? This is just more everything." Mrs. Holcomb discreetly excused herself, leaving them alone. Luke pulled Clara to her feet, holding her like she was made of spun glass. "I need you to know," Clara said against his shoulder. "I'm not giving up the work, the bank, the school. I'll find a way to manage it all." "I know you will. You're the strongest person I've ever met." He pulled back to look at her. "Our child will grow up seeing that strength, seeing that a woman can be anything she sets her mind to. Or a man. Clara added with a small smile. We shouldn't assume. Boy or girl, they'll have your spine and hopefully your head for figures. Heaven help us if they get my stubbornness. Our stubbornness, Clara corrected. I've never been accused of being yielding. The months that followed tested that stubbornness in new ways. Morning sickness hit Clara hard, but she refused to miss a day at the bank. When concerned citizens suggested she should be resting, she reminded them that work didn't stop for biology. When her pregnancy became obvious and some conservative customers threatened to withdraw their funds, she faced them down with facts about the bank's superior performance. Your money has grown by 12% under my management, she told one particularly vocal critic. If you want to move it to a less profitable institution because of my condition, that's your choice, but it's a foolish one. The man stayed. They all did. Because whatever their opinions about propriety, none could argue with Clara's results. Luke, for his part, became increasingly protective as winter approached. He insisted on driving her to town himself, stationed Cookie as an unofficial guard at the bank, and would have wrapped her in cotton if she'd allowed it. I'm pregnant, not porcelain, Clara reminded him one snowy morning as he fretted about ice on the steps. You're carrying our future, he countered. I'm allowed to worry. The baby came with the spring thaw, as if waiting for the world to warm before making an entrance. Clara's labor was long but uncomplicated, with Mrs. Holcomb attending alongside the doctor she'd insisted on bringing from the territorial capital. Modern medicine, she'd told Luke when he'd balked at the expense. Your wife deserves the best. When it was over, when their daughter lay pink and perfect in Clara's arms, Luke wept openly. She's beautiful. Look at her, Clara. She's already got your determined chin. And your nose. Poor thing. Clara was exhausted but radiant. What shall we call her? They'd discussed names for months, but looking at their daughter, only one seemed right. Sarah, Luke said softly. Sarah Hope Garrett, for the past and the future. Clara nodded, touching the baby's downy head. Sarah Hope. May she have better options than either of her namesake's mothers. The return to work came sooner than anyone expected. 3 weeks after Sarah's birth, Clara appeared at the bank with a baby in a specially designed sling, paperwork in one hand, daughter in the other. Babies sleep most of the day anyway, she explained to shocked customers. No reason I can't work while she does. It became a common sight Clara conducting business with Sarah sleeping peacefully against her chest, or later, playing in a corner of the office under the watchful eye of whatever lumber worker Luke had assigned as unofficial baby guard. The child grew up to the sound of adding machines and business negotiations, cutting her teeth on ledger corners and learning to walk by pulling herself up on the bank's counter. The arrangement scandalized some, inspired others. Young women began appearing at Clara's door, seeking advice on everything from arithmetic to life choices. She mentored them all, creating an informal network of educated women that slowly changed Bitter Creek's character. The school expanded, requiring a second teacher. The bank opened a branch in a neighboring town. The lumber business grew to include a sawmill and furniture workshop. Through it all, Clara and Luke remained partners in the truest sense, sharing work and home with equal dedication. On Sarah's 5th birthday, they stood once again on their porch, watching their daughter chase fireflies in the yard. Inside, ledgers waited always ledgers, but for now, they were content to simply be. Do you ever think about how different life would have been? Luke asked. If Morrison had kept his word. Clara laughed, a rich sound that spoke of hard-won joy. I'd be dead inside by now, crushed into something small and proper and utterly unlike myself. She caught Sarah as the girl ran to them, lifting her high. Instead, I have this, we have this. Mama, look. Sarah held out a jar with 3 blinking fireflies. I caught them myself. Well done, darling. But remember what we do after we admire them. Let them go. Sarah said solemnly, because beautiful things should be free. As the child carefully released her prizes, Luke slipped his arm around Clara's waist. Like her mother. Like all women should be. Clara corrected, free to choose, to work, to be themselves fully. A wagon rumbled past on the road below. Heading for the train station. Another arrival, perhaps. Another soul seeking something new in the West. Clara wondered if among them might be another woman fleeing the constraints of convention, carrying hopes that didn't quite match reality. If so, she'd find a different Bitter Creek than Clara had encountered, a place where a woman could own a bank, where a mother could work without shame, where partnership meant true equality. Not perfect nowhere was but better, growing better each day. Mama, Sarah tugged at her skirt. Tell me again about when you came on the train. Again, Luke groaned good-naturedly. She knows it by heart. I like it, Sarah insisted. It's exciting. Clara settled on the porch steps, her daughter in her lap, Luke beside them. Well, I stepped off that train expecting to meet a man who'd promised to marry me. As she told the story edited for young ears, Clara marveled at the journey. From rejected bride to respected businesswoman. From desperate arrival to pillar of the community. The woman who'd stood alone on that platform could never have imagined this moment successful beyond her dreams. Loved beyond her hopes. Free beyond her wildest expectations. And then what happened, Mama? Then I met your father, who saw me as I truly was. And we built something together, businesses, a home, a family, a life. And you lived happily ever after. Clara met Luke's eyes over their daughter's head, seeing in them the same love that had sustained her through every challenge. We lived truthfully ever after, she corrected gently, which is better than happy, because truth means we face troubles together, solve problems together, build together. Happiness comes and goes, Sarah, but truth endures. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they went inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. The bank, the business, the continuing fight for women's recognition in the territory. But tonight, in this home built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, Clara Mayfield Garrett was content. She'd traveled 3,000 miles seeking one life and found something infinitely more valuable, the freedom to define life on her own terms. And that, more than any happily ever after, was the true gift of her Western journey. In the warmth of the lamplight, Luke reached out and touched her cheek with work-worn hands. Gentle as that first night when she'd discovered what love truly meant, not possession or protection, but partnership, recognition, the gift of being seen and valued exactly as you are. No regrets, he asked, as he often did. Never, she answered, as she always would. Not one. Dear friends, thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara's journey touched your heart as it did mine. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this story meant to you. If you enjoyed this tale of courage and true partnership, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these authentic frontier stories. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.